You know that feeling when something starts to change, but no one says it out loud? The messages become shorter, the pauses get longer, the warmth you used to feel in their presence starts to cool, almost quietly, like a room losing heat when a window is left slightly open. And you can sense it before you can explain it. Something is off. But when you try to understand it, there's nothing concrete to hold on to, no clear argument, no obvious mistake, just a shift, subtle but undeniable. And what makes it heavier is that you start looking inward, replaying conversations, wondering if you said too much or not enough, if you were too available or maybe not interesting enough to keep their attention. Most people don't talk about this part. They'll say things like, people just get bored, or you need to keep things exciting, as if human connection is some kind of performance you're supposed to maintain. And when interest fades, the quiet assumption is that something about you wasn't enough. But that interpretation misses something deeper. Because in many cases, this isn't about you lacking something. It's about a pattern that unfolds between people, often without either person fully understanding why. What people call losing interest is rarely as simple as it sounds. There's more going on here than people realize. At a psychological level, interest is closely tied to novelty, uncertainty, and emotional activation. Early interactions often carry a kind of unpredictability. The brain, especially the reward system, responds strongly to that. There's a chemical component to it. Dopamine increases when something feels new, slightly uncertain, and potentially rewarding. But over time, as things become more familiar, that intensity naturally settles. This isn't a failure, it's how the nervous system works. The part that's less obvious is how people respond to that shift. Some people interpret the calming of that initial intensity as a loss of feeling. Others unconsciously chase the earlier emotional high without realizing that what they're actually missing isn't the person, but the state of uncertainty they were in. So when things begin to feel stable, predictable, or emotionally safe, something inside them disengages. Not because the connection isn't meaningful, but because their nervous system no longer reads it as stimulating. And then there's another layer. Human beings are constantly reading subtle signals from each other: availability, emotional tone, responsiveness. When someone senses that you are fully there, fully invested, and emotionally open, it can create two very different reactions depending on their internal wiring. For some, it feels grounding. For others, it feels like pressure. Not conscious pressure, not something they would say out loud, but something their system interprets as intensity. And when that happens, distance becomes a way to regulate. It's not always intentional. It doesn't mean they sat down and decided to lose interest. It often happens quietly, through small shifts in attention, energy, and emotional presence. And from the outside, it looks like you did something wrong. But if you trace it back, it often has more to do with how people learned to experience connection in the first place. Someone who grew up in an environment where attention was inconsistent may associate interest with unpredictability, where affection had to be earned, or where closeness came and went without explanation. Over time, their system adapts. It learns that intensity equals meaning. So when something becomes steady, their mind doesn't always register it as deepening. Sometimes it registers it as fading. On the other side, someone who learned to be consistent, attentive, and emotionally present might naturally bring stability into a connection. They're not trying to create uncertainty, they're trying to build something real. But those two patterns don't always align, and when they meet, the shift can feel confusing because one person is leaning into connection while the other is unconsciously stepping away from it, not out of disinterest in the person, but out of a learned response to what connection feels like. It's important to say this clearly. This isn't about one way of being better than another. There isn't a right way to connect that works universally. Some people are wired to find comfort in stability. Others are wired to feel more alive in unpredictability. Both come from real experiences. Both make sense when you understand where they come from. The tension happens in the space between those differences, and that's where most misunderstandings live. What makes this even more complex is that the person who seems to lose interest often isn't fully aware of why it's happening. If you ask them, they might say, "I don't feel the same anymore,"
without realizing that what changed wasn't necessarily the connection itself, but the internal state they were experiencing. And for the person on the receiving end, it can feel deeply personal because you stayed the same, you showed up, you were present, you didn't withdraw, and somehow that became the reason things shifted. There's a quiet paradox in this. The very qualities that create real connection, consistency, openness, emotional availability, are not always the same qualities that sustain early attraction for everyone. In some cases, they actually calm the very tension that was holding the other person's attention in place. So what looks like losing interest in you is sometimes a transition from intensity to stability, that one person interprets as comfort and the other interprets as absence. And that interpretation shapes everything that follows. It can lead to withdrawal, confusion, or the slow fading of something that, on a deeper level, never actually lost its value. It just changed form. None of this means you were too much or not enough. It doesn't mean you should have been different, more distant, or harder to understand. It means that human connection is influenced by layers that aren't always visible in the moment, by past experiences, by nervous system patterns, by unconscious associations with closeness and distance. And when those layers don't align, the shift can feel sudden, even though it was building quietly beneath the surface. If you've been on the receiving end of this, it makes sense that it stayed with you, because it doesn't come with closure. It doesn't come with a clear explanation, just a feeling that something slipped through your hands without you knowing why. But that doesn't mean there was something wrong with the way you showed up. It means the connection existed within a dynamic that had its own limits, and understanding that can change how you carry it. Not as a question of your worth, but as an awareness of how different people experience closeness in different ways. There are patterns in the way people connect that don't reveal themselves immediately, and once you start noticing them, certain experiences begin to make more sense. Not simpler, but clearer. And if this felt familiar in a way you couldn't quite put into words before, there's more to uncover about the patterns people bring into connection and how they shape what stays and what fades.